5 years after James's passing, Eliza sat in her favorite chair overlooking the Chesapeake Bay, watching as spring brought new life to the garden they had planted together. At 85, her body had grown frilier, but her mind remained sharp, her spirit undimmed by time or loss. The house felt different without James, quieter, emptier in some fundamental way, but Eliza had found a rhythm to her days that brought her peace. Mornings were for correspondence and writing. She was completing a memoir of their journey together, not just as pioneers of the protocol but as partners in life. Afternoons often brought visitors, colleagues, former patients, family members who made sure she was never truly alone. Today, she was expecting her great-granddaughter Sophia, who at 17 showed every sign of following the family tradition into medicine. The girl had her great-grandfather's determined spirit and her great-grandmother's quiet compassion, a combination that Eliza recognized would serve her well in the path she had chosen. The sound of a car in the driveway announced Sophia's arrival. Moments later, the teenager bounded into the sunroom, her energy a stark contrast to Eliza's measured movements. Great-grandma. Sophia embraced Eliza carefully, mindful of her fragility but unable to contain her excitement. I got accepted to Johns Hopkins for their pre-med program. Early admission. Congratulations, darling, Eliza smiled, genuinely pleased. Your great-grandfather would be so proud. Sophia settled into the chair opposite Eliza, her expression growing more serious. That's partly why I wanted to see you today. I have to give a presentation in my AP biology class about a medical innovation that changed patient outcomes. Everyone else is doing things like MRI technology or targeted cancer therapies. And you want to present on the Harrington-Chen Protocol, Eliza guessed. Sophia nodded. But I don't want to just repeat what's in the textbooks or research papers. I want to tell the real story, the human story behind it. She hesitated. Would you mind if I recorded you talking about those early days? About how it all really began? Eliza considered the request. She had told the story countless times over the decades, in medical conferences, in interviews, in the training programs at the Institute. But rarely had she spoken about the deeply personal aspects, the quiet moments between the medical milestones. I think I'd like that, she said finally. But first, let me show you something. She rose carefully and moved to a cherry wood cabinet in the corner of the room. From a drawer, she removed a small box, the same one she had brought to James's memorial service 5 years earlier. Inside lay the journal she had kept during those critical weeks at Walter Reed, its pages now yellowed with age. This is where it truly began, Eliza said, returning to her chair. Not with research or theory, but with one nurse sitting beside one patient, refusing to believe he was beyond reaching. As Sophia set up her recording device, Eliza opened the journal to the first entry, dated 45 years earlier. She began to read aloud, her voice soft but clear. Commander Harrington arrived today, critical condition following IED explosion in Afghanistan. Multiple trauma, severe TBI, unresponsive to stimuli. Prognosis poor according to Dr. Reynolds. But I noticed something the others missed. His heart rate changes slightly when voices are present in the room. Not conclusive, but enough to make me wonder if he can hear us, even in his current state. I've decided to talk to him during my shifts, explain procedures, share news, anything to maintain a connection. The other staff think it's pointless. Maybe it is. But what if it isn't? What if he's in there, listening, waiting for someone to reach him? Eliza looked up at her great-granddaughter. That was the beginning, not a medical breakthrough, but a simple question, what if? For the next 2 hours, Eliza shared the story as she had never shared it before, the intimate details, the moments of doubt, the small victories that kept her going when others had given up. She described the first time James moved his fingers in response to her voice, the day he opened his eyes, the gradual return to consciousness that defied medical expectations. The doctors had a term for what they thought I was doing, Eliza recalled. They called it, emotional investment in a terminal case. They saw it as a weakness, a failure to maintain professional distance. She smiled slightly. They didn't understand that the connection was the medicine. Sophia listened, captivated, occasionally asking questions that revealed her own developing understanding of medicine. So the protocol isn't just about talking to unconscious patients, she said thoughtfully. It's about recognizing their personhood even when they can't express it. Exactly, Eliza nodded, pleased by her great-granddaughter's insight. The technical aspects, the specific verbal engagement patterns, the sensory stimulation techniques, the family involvement protocols, those all came later, through research and refinement. But the core principle was established in those early days, that human connection can reach places medical procedures cannot. As the afternoon light began to fade, Eliza reached the part of the story that still moved her deeply, even after 45 years. Before your great-grandfather was transferred to rehabilitation, he insisted on standing, she said. He was nowhere near ready medically, his muscles had atrophied, his balance was compromised, his strength severely diminished. But he was determined. Why was it so important to him? Sophia asked. I didn't know at the time, Eliza replied. I thought perhaps it was a matter of pride, of proving to himself that recovery was possible. It wasn't until later that I understood the true significance. She described helping James to his feet, supporting him as he trembled with the effort of standing upright for the first time since his injury. And then, she said, her voice softening with the memory, he saluted me. A perfect military salute, executed with all the strength he could muster. What did it mean? Sophia asked, though her expression suggested she already understood the significance. In military tradition, a salute is the highest form of respect, Eliza explained. For a decorated SEAL commander to salute a nurse was unprecedented, a public acknowledgement that what I had done for him transcended ordinary care. It was his way of saying that I had fought for him when he couldn't fight for himself, that I had seen his humanity when others saw only his injuries. Sophia was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. And that's when the doctors started taking your approach seriously? That was the beginning, Eliza nodded. It's difficult to dismiss results, even when they come through methods you don't fully understand or approve of. James's recovery was remarkable by any standard, faster and more complete than anyone had predicted. It raised questions that demanded answers. As darkness fell outside, Eliza concluded the story with the establishment of the first formal research study into what would eventually become the Harrington-Chen Protocol. From that point on, it became less about us as individuals and more about the methodology itself, the systematic application of principles we had discovered through our personal experience. Sophia turned off her recording device, her expression thoughtful. Thank you, great-grandma. This is so much more powerful than what's in the textbooks. The textbooks have their place, Eliza said gently. The research, the data, the evidence-based practices, they're all essential. But never forget that behind every medical breakthrough, there are human stories. Behind every protocol, there are people who discovered it through their own suffering or dedication or love. After Sophia left, promising to share her presentation once it was complete, Eliza remained in her chair, watching as stars appeared over the bay. The telling of their story had brought James close again, not in the sharp pain of fresh grief, but in the gentle presence of memory. She touched the 2 trident pins that still hung around her neck, one given in life, one in death, both symbols of a journey neither of them could have imagined when they first met in that hospital room 45 years ago. In the quiet darkness, Eliza raised her hand in the salute that had become their most meaningful gesture, a tribute to the man who had changed her life, to the work they had created together, and to the legacy that continued to bring healing to countless others around the world. 3 months later, on a bright summer morning, the staff of the Harrington-Chen Institute gathered for an emergency meeting. Dr. Maya Rodriguez stood before them, her expression solemn but composed. It is with profound sadness that I share the news of Admiral Eliza Chen's passing, she announced. She died peacefully in her sleep last night, surrounded by family. A hush fell over the assembled staff, doctors, nurses, researchers, and administrators who had dedicated their careers to advancing the work Eliza and James had begun. In accordance with her wishes, Dr. Rodriguez continued, there will be a private family service, followed by a public memorial here at the Institute next month. She asked that instead of flowers, donations be made to the Harrington-Chen Scholarship Fund for combat medics seeking medical education. In the days that followed, tributes poured in from around the world, from medical professionals whose practice had been transformed by the protocol, from military personnel whose lives had been saved by it, from patients and families who had experienced its healing power firsthand. The New England Journal of Medicine published a special edition dedicated to Eliza's contributions to trauma medicine. The Surgeon General issued a statement acknowledging her revolutionary impact on military medical care. The WHO established an Eliza Chen Award for Innovation in Humanitarian Medicine. But perhaps the most meaningful tribute came from Sophia, who stood before her AP biology class and presented not just the scientific aspects of the Harrington-Chen Protocol, but the human story behind it, the journey of a wounded warrior and the nurse who refused to let him go, whose connection had transformed not just their own lives but the practice of medicine itself. My great-grandparents discovered something profound about healing, she told her classmates, her voice steady despite her recent loss. That it happens not just through procedures and medications, but through human connection. That sometimes, the most powerful medicine is the simple act of one person saying to another, I see you. I hear you. You are not alone. 1 month after Eliza's passing, the Harrington-Chen Institute hosted her memorial service. The auditorium was filled beyond capacity, just as it had been for James's service 5 years earlier. Military personnel stood alongside medical professionals, former patients beside researchers, family members next to strangers whose lives had been touched by the protocol that bore her name. Dr. Maya Rodriguez approached the podium, carrying a small wooden box, the same one that had contained Eliza's journal at James's memorial. Admiral Eliza Chen left specific instructions for today, she began. She asked that I read something she wrote in the final pages of the journal she kept during Captain Harrington's recovery 45 years ago. Maya opened the box and removed the worn journal, turning to the very last page, past James's message that Eliza had shared at his memorial, to a new entry written in Eliza's elegant handwriting, dated just weeks before her death. To those who will carry this work forward. 45 years ago, I sat beside a wounded warrior and refused to believe he was beyond reaching. I spoke into silence with the expectation of being heard. I connected across a void that medicine said was unbridgeable. What James and I discovered through that experience wasn't just a medical methodology, but a profound truth about healing, that it happens in relationship, in connection, in the recognition of each person's inherent dignity and worth. The protocol that bears our names has been validated by research, refined through practice, and implemented worldwide. But its essence remains unchanged, the belief that no one is beyond reaching, no one is beyond hearing, and no one is beyond return. As you continue this work, remember that behind every patient is a person with a story, behind every injury is a life worth fighting for, and behind every medical challenge is an opportunity for human connection to accomplish what technology alone cannot. James and I found each other across the divide of trauma. We built something extraordinary from that connection. Now we entrust it to you, not just as a medical protocol, but as a testament to the power of presence, the healing force of being truly seen and heard, and the courage to believe in return when all evidence suggests surrender. With gratitude and hope. Eliza Chen Harrington. As Maya closed the journal, a single shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds outside, illuminating the stage where she stood. Many in the audience would later describe it as a moment of transcendent beauty, a final salute from nature itself to a woman whose life had been dedicated to bringing light to darkness. In the front row, Sophia sat with her family, the 2 seal trident pins that had belonged to her great-grandparents now in her possession, symbols of a legacy she had promised to honor through her own journey into medicine. And somewhere in that auditorium, in the collective memory of all who had gathered to honor Eliza Chen Harrington, lived the story that had started it all, of doctors who laughed at a new nurse, until a wounded SEAL commander saluted her. Of two people who found each other across the divide of trauma and built from that connection a revolution in healing that would continue to transform lives long after they were gone. For in the end, that was their greatest legacy, not just the protocol that bore their names, but the profound understanding that healing is, at its core, an act of connection. That presence has power beyond measurement. And that sometimes, the most revolutionary act is to believe in another person's return when all evidence suggests they are lost. It was a story of hope in the face of impossible odds, of dignity restored through simple respect, and of lives transformed by the courage to stand, or sit, beside someone when everyone else has walked away. 50 years after that fateful day at Walter Reed, the Harrington-Chen Protocol had become so thoroughly integrated into medical practice worldwide that many young practitioners could scarcely imagine trauma care without it. What had once been revolutionary was now fundamental, the understanding that healing involves not just treating physical injuries but recognizing and supporting the whole person, even when that person cannot respond. The Harrington-Chen Institute had expanded into a global network of research and treatment centers, each dedicated to advancing the principles that James and Eliza had discovered through their own journey. The original building at Walter Reed, where it had all begun, was now a historical landmark, a pilgrimage site for medical professionals seeking to connect with the roots of what many considered the most significant paradigm shift in trauma care of the 21st century. On the 50th anniversary of the protocol's inception, a special ceremony was held in the Institute's main auditorium. Dr. Sophia Chen Williams, now Chief of Neurology at Johns Hopkins and the foremost authority on consciousness in trauma patients, stood before an audience that included medical professionals, military personnel, and 3 generations of the Harrington-Chen family. 50 years ago today, she began, my great-grandmother, Nurse Eliza Chen, sat beside the bed of a wounded SEAL commander named James Harrington. The doctors had given him little chance of meaningful recovery. His injuries were catastrophic, his brain activity minimal, his prognosis grim by every medical standard of the time. Sophia paused, looking out at the assembled faces, some who knew the story intimately, others who were hearing it in this setting for the first time. What happened next has been documented in medical journals, depicted in films, and taught in every medical school in the world. But the essence of that moment transcends clinical description. It was, at its heart, an act of profound human connection, one person refusing to believe another was beyond reaching. On the screen behind her, a photograph appeared, the only known image of Eliza sitting beside James's hospital bed during those early days. It had been taken by a medical student documenting patient care and discovered years later in the hospital archives. In the grainy image, Eliza leaned close to the unconscious commander, her hand resting lightly on his, her expression one of gentle determination. My great-grandmother spoke to him when others had given up, Sophia continued. She read him news articles, explained medical procedures, shared stories from her own experiences in conflict zones. She connected with him not just as a patient, but as a person with dignity, with history, with the potential for return. The image on the screen changed to the now famous photograph of James standing on trembling legs, saluting Eliza before his transfer to rehabilitation. The moment that had changed everything. When Commander Harrington saluted Nurse Chen, he did more than acknowledge her care. He challenged the fundamental assumptions of medicine at that time, that unresponsive patients were unreachable, that connection was impossible across the void of severe brain injury, that dignity was somehow diminished by trauma. Sophia gestured to a display case at the side of the stage, where the original journal Eliza had kept during James's recovery was preserved alongside his 2 SEAL Trident pins. From that moment grew not just a medical protocol, but a movement, a fundamental reconsideration of how we understand consciousness, connection, and the human capacity for return from the darkest places. As Sophia continued her address, detailing the scientific advances and clinical outcomes that had validated the protocol over 5 decades, she emphasized that its true power lay not in its technical aspects but in its recognition of each patient's essential humanity. The Harrington-Chen Protocol works not because it follows a specific script or timeline, but because it honors the person behind the patient, she explained. It creates space for connection when connection seems impossible. It offers presence when absence seems inevitable. It speaks into silence with the expectation of being heard. After the ceremony, as attendees mingled in the Institute's memorial garden, Sophia found a quiet moment beside the bronze sculpture of two hands reaching toward each other. She carried with her a small wooden box, the same one that had held Eliza's journal at both James's and Eliza's memorial services, now passed down to her as the keeper of their legacy. Opening it, she removed not the journal, which remained in its display case, but a letter, the last one Eliza had written before her death 15 years earlier, addressed to whoever would represent the family at the 50th anniversary. Sophia unfolded it carefully, though she had read it many times before. To my dear descendant. If you are reading this, 50 years have passed since that day at Walter Reed when James and I began our unexpected journey together. I cannot know what advances medicine will have made by then, what new technologies will have emerged, what challenges will have been overcome. But I do know this, the fundamental truth we discovered will remain unchanged. Healing happens in connection. Presence has power beyond measurement. And no one, no matter how severely injured, how deeply unconscious, how apparently unreachable, is beyond the possibility of return. As you commemorate this anniversary, remember that the protocol that bears our names was never really about us. It was about recognizing the dignity inherent in every human being, even when that dignity is obscured by trauma or illness. It was about having the courage to speak into silence, to reach across void, to believe in return when all evidence suggests surrender. James and I found each other across that void. We built a life together from what began in crisis. We created something that outlived us both. But our greatest legacy isn't the protocol itself, it's the countless moments of connection it has facilitated, the innumerable returns it has supported, the immeasurable dignity it has preserved. Whatever form medicine takes in your time, whatever new challenges you face, whatever discoveries lie ahead, hold fast to this truth, that at the heart of all healing is the recognition of our shared humanity, our fundamental connectedness, our capacity to reach one another even across the deepest divides. With love across time. Eliza. Sophia folded the letter and returned it to its box. As she did so, she noticed a young medical student standing nearby, watching the sculpture with a thoughtful expression. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Sophia said, approaching her. The space between the hands represents the journey from isolation to connection. The student nodded. "I've been studying the protocol for my neurology rotation. The science is fascinating, the neuroplasticity implications, the consciousness research, the outcome data." She hesitated. "But I keep coming back to the human story behind it. It's almost, I don't know, romantic." Sophia smiled. "My great-grandparents would have appreciated that description. Their journey began as patient and nurse, evolved into colleagues and advocates, and blossomed into a partnership that transformed medicine. But at its heart, it was indeed a love story, not just between two people, but between humanity and the possibility of return from our darkest places." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the memorial garden, Sophia found herself surrounded by her extended family, children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, cousins, the living legacy of James and Eliza Harrington. Many had followed their ancestors into medicine or military service, carrying forward not just their names but their commitment to healing, connection, and the recognition of dignity in every human being. Together, they gathered around the sculpture that had become the symbol of the Harrington-Chen Protocol, two hands reaching toward each other across an unbridgeable gap, yet somehow connected in the space between. In unison, they raised their hands in the salute that had started everything 50 years before, a gesture that had grown from a moment of recognition between a wounded warrior and a determined nurse into a symbol of the protocol itself, a tribute to the power of human connection to transcend even the deepest trauma. As they lowered their hands, Sophia looked out at the institute that bore her great-grandparents' names, at the medical professionals who carried their work forward, at the family that continued their legacy. And she knew with absolute certainty that the story that had begun 50 years ago, of doctors who laughed at a new nurse, until a wounded SEAL commander saluted her, would continue to transform lives for generations to come. For in that story lay a truth as timeless as humanity itself, that healing is not just a medical outcome but a human connection, that recovery is not just a physical process but a shared expedition, and that sometimes the most powerful medicine is not found in technology or pharmaceuticals, but in the unwavering belief that every patient, no matter how wounded, deserves to be seen, heard, and called back to life. It was a legacy of hope in the face of impossible odds, of dignity restored through simple respect, and of lives transformed by the courage to stand, or sit, beside someone when everyone else has walked away. And in hospitals and clinics around the world, in state-of-the-art facilities and makeshift field hospitals, in peaceful nations and conflict zones, that legacy continued to unfold, one patient, one caregiver, one moment of genuine connection at a time. 100 years after that fateful day at Walter Reed, the principles of the Harrington-Chen Protocol had become so fundamental to medical practice that they were considered as essential as the Hippocratic Oath itself. What had begun as one nurse's refusal to give up on a wounded warrior had evolved into a cornerstone of healing across all medical disciplines. The centennial celebration was held not just at the original institute, now a historical landmark, but simultaneously at thousands of medical facilities worldwide. Through advanced holographic technology, practitioners from every continent gathered virtually to commemorate what historians had come to recognize as one of the most significant paradigm shifts in the history of medicine. Dr. James Chen Harrington, Eliza and James's great-great-grandson and the current director of Global Consciousness Research at the United Nations Medical Division, stood on the stage where his ancestors had once shared their story. At 45, he bore a striking resemblance to his namesake, the same determined eyes, the same quiet strength. 100 years ago today, he began, his voice reaching audiences across the globe. A young nurse named Eliza Chen made a simple but revolutionary decision. She chose to speak to a patient whom others had deemed unreachable. She chose to connect when connection seemed impossible. She chose to believe in return when all evidence suggested surrender. Behind him, a three-dimensional holographic image appeared, the famous photograph of James Harrington standing on trembling legs, saluting Eliza before his transfer to rehabilitation. The image was so vivid, so present, that it seemed the two pioneers might step from the past into the present at any moment. That decision, and the salute that acknowledged it, launched what we now recognize as the most profound reconsideration of consciousness, connection, and healing in modern medicine. What began as an intuitive act of compassion has been validated by a century of research, millions of patient outcomes, and advances in neuroscience that have fundamentally transformed our understanding of the human mind. The holographic display shifted to show a timeline of the protocol's evolution, from its origins in that hospital room to its current applications across medical specialties, from its initial focus on trauma patients to its expansion into all aspects of healthcare. Today, we take for granted that presence is as essential to healing as any medication or procedure, Dr. Chen Harrington continued. We understand that connection reaches beyond conscious awareness, that dignity persists beyond responsiveness, that humanity transcends injury. But 100 years ago, these were revolutionary concepts, championed by two individuals who discovered them through their own journey from darkness to light. As he spoke, medical facilities around the world displayed their own connections to the Harrington-Chen legacy, trauma units where the protocol had saved countless lives, rehabilitation centers where it had facilitated remarkable recoveries, research laboratories where it had inspired breakthroughs in consciousness science. The medical advances of the past century have been extraordinary, Dr. Chen Harrington acknowledged. Regenerative technologies that would have seemed miraculous to our ancestors. Neural interfaces that allowed direct communication with even the most severely injured brains. Consciousness mapping that reveals activity once invisible to our instruments. But none of these technologies would have developed as they did without the fundamental shift in perspective that James and Eliza Harrington initiated, the recognition that healing begins with connection, that presence has power beyond measurement, and that no one is beyond reaching. After the global ceremony concluded, Dr. Chen Harrington made his way to a private garden at the heart of the institute, a space reserved for family members and those who had been personally touched by the protocol. Here, away from the public commemorations, a more intimate gathering took place. The garden had been designed to replicate the one at James and Eliza's home on the Chesapeake Bay, where they had spent their final years together. At its center stood not a high-tech hologram but a simple bronze sculpture, the original two hands reaching toward each other, now weathered by time but still powerful in its symbolism. Around this sculpture gathered the extended Harrington-Chen family, descendants who had followed their ancestors into medicine, military service, humanitarian work, and research. Some bore the physical resemblance of their forebears, all carried forward their legacy of compassion, determination, and belief in the power of human connection. Dr. Chen Harrington approached the sculpture, carrying a small wooden box, the same one that had held Eliza's journal, passed down through generations as a tangible link to their beginnings. From it, he removed not the journal itself, which was now preserved in the Smithsonian, but two objects that held profound significance: the original seal trident pins that James had given to Eliza, one during his recovery and one upon his death. 100 years ago, he said to his assembled family, these pins symbolized a connection that transcended professional boundaries, that defied medical expectations, that transformed not just two lives but the practice of medicine itself. They represented courage, determination, and the refusal to surrender, qualities that defined both James and Eliza throughout their remarkable journey together. He placed the pins carefully at the base of the sculpture, a private tribute amidst the public celebrations. Our ancestors discovered something profound about healing, he continued. Not through laboratory research or clinical trials, but through their own experience of trauma and recovery, connection and return. They found that the space between two people, between patient and caregiver, between the lost and the one who refuses to let go, is where the most powerful medicine exists. As twilight fell, the family gathered in a circle around the sculpture. Following tradition, they raised their hands in the salute that had started everything a century before, a gesture that had grown from a moment of recognition between a wounded warrior and a determined nurse into a symbol of the protocol itself, a tribute to the enduring power of human connection. Later that evening, as the public celebrations continued around the world, Dr. Chen Harrington found a quiet moment alone in the original trauma room at Walter Reed, now preserved exactly as it had been 100 years earlier. Here, in this unremarkable hospital room, something remarkable had begun, a revolution not of technology but of perspective, not of procedures but of presence. He sat in the chair beside the empty bed, imagining his great-great-grandmother sitting in this same spot, speaking to an unconscious patient when others had given up hope. What courage that had taken, what determination, what faith in the power of connection. From his pocket, he removed a small device, a neural interface developed through research inspired by the protocol, capable of detecting consciousness in patients previously considered unresponsive. This technology, now standard in trauma care worldwide, had saved countless lives, facilitated innumerable returns, preserved immeasurable dignity. And it had grown directly from the seeds planted in this room a century ago. Full circle, he murmured, echoing the phrase that had marked so many milestones in James and Eliza's journey. As he prepared to leave, to rejoin the centennial celebrations, Dr. Chen Harrington paused at the doorway. In a gesture as old as military tradition yet as personal as his family's history, he raised his hand in a perfect salute, a final tribute to the wounded warrior and the determined nurse whose connection had transformed medicine forever. Outside, the world continued to commemorate the centennial of the Harrington-Chen Protocol with speeches and ceremonies, research presentations, and patient testimonials. But here, in this quiet room where it had all begun, the essence of that protocol was distilled to its purest form, the simple, revolutionary belief that no one is beyond reaching, no one is beyond hearing, and no one is beyond return. For in the end, that was the true legacy of James and Eliza Harrington, not just a medical methodology, but a profound understanding of what it means to heal and be healed. Not just a protocol for trauma care, but a testament to the power of human connection to transcend even the deepest wounds. Not just a chapter in medical history, but a story that continued to unfold in hospitals and clinics around the world, wherever one person reached across the void to another and refused to let go. It was a legacy of hope in the face of impossible odds, of dignity preserved through simple respect, and of lives transformed by the courage to stand, or sit, beside someone when everyone else had walked away. And as long as there were patients in need of healing, as long as there were caregivers willing to connect across the deepest divides, as long as there was human suffering and human compassion to answer it, the story that had begun 100 years ago, of doctors who laughed at a new nurse, until a wounded SEAL commander saluted her, would continue to bring light to darkness, presence to absence, and return to those who seemed forever lost. As the bicentennial of the Harrington-Chen Protocol approached, humanity had spread beyond Earth to colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter. Medical science had advanced in ways that would have seemed miraculous to previous generations: nanobots that could repair cellular damage, consciousness transfers that could preserve the mind when the body failed, regenerative technologies that could regrow entire organs from a patient's own cells. Yet amidst these technological marvels, the fundamental principles discovered by James and Eliza Harrington 2 centuries earlier remained at the core of healing practice throughout human civilization. The understanding that presence matters, that connection reaches beyond conscious awareness, that dignity persists regardless of condition, these truths had proven as essential in space habitats and Martian medical facilities as they had in that first hospital room at Walter Reed. Dr. Eliza Harrington-Chen, the seventh-generation descendant of the protocol's founders and chief medical officer of the Jupiter Ganymede colony, stood in the historical holographic chamber of the colony's medical center. Around her, the most advanced medical technology in human history hummed with quiet efficiency. But her attention was focused on the life-sized holographic recreation before her, the original trauma room at Walter Reed, rendered in perfect detail from historical records. In this virtual space, she could witness the moment that had changed medicine forever: a young nurse sitting beside the bed of a wounded warrior, speaking to him when others had given up, connecting with him across the void of unconsciousness. "Begin historical sequence," she commanded softly. The holographic figures came to life, Eliza Chen adjusting monitors, checking bandages, then sitting beside James Harrington's bed and beginning to speak. Though the original conversations had not been recorded, the recreation used the journal entries and later accounts to create a plausible representation of those critical moments. "Commander Harrington," the holographic nurse said, "my name is Eliza Chen. I'm going to be one of your nurses. I know the doctors think you can't hear me, but I've seen too many miracles to believe that." Dr. Harrington-Chen watched as the scene unfolded, days compressed into minutes, the gradual signs of response, the moment of first conscious movement, and finally, the salute that had changed everything. Though she had viewed this recreation countless times throughout her medical training and career, it never failed to move her. As the hologram faded, she turned to face the group of medical students who had been observing silently from the chamber's perimeter, young doctors in training from Earth, Mars, and the orbital habitats, representing the diversity of humanity's expansion into the solar system. 200 years ago, she said, my ancestors discovered something profound about healing, not through technology, though they embraced it, and not through pharmaceuticals, though they utilized them, but through the simple, revolutionary act of human connection. She gestured to the now empty space where the hologram had been. In an age when we can repair neural pathways with nanobots and regrow damaged tissue with molecular scaffolding, it might seem that this aspect of medicine has been rendered obsolete. Nothing could be further from the truth. The students listened attentively as Dr. Harrington-Chen continued, the more advanced our technology becomes, the more essential the human element of healing. Our ancestors understood that recovery happens not just through procedures and medications, but through connection, through presence, through the recognition of each patient's essential humanity. She moved to a control panel and activated another holographic display, this one showing the evolution of the protocol across 2 centuries, from its origins in trauma care to its applications in space medicine, from its initial focus on brain injuries to its expansion into all aspects of healing, including the psychological challenges of long-duration space missions and the unique medical conditions that arose in variable gravity environments. The Harrington-Chen Protocol has evolved with each new medical breakthrough, each new understanding of consciousness, each new environment humans have inhabited, she explained. But its essence remains unchanged, the belief that healing happens in relationship, that presence has power beyond measurement, and that no one is beyond reaching. After the teaching session concluded, Dr. Harrington-Chen made her way to the colony's memorial garden, a carefully cultivated space where earth plants grew under the artificial light of the habitat dome, creating a living connection to the home planet. At the center of this garden stood a replica of the bronze sculpture that had become the symbol of the protocol, two hands reaching toward each other across an unbridgeable gap, yet somehow connected in the space between. She approached the sculpture, touching it gently as generations of her family had done before her. From her pocket, she removed a small object, a data crystal containing the complete historical records of the protocol's development, including Eliza's original journal, James's military records, and 2 centuries of research, refinements, and applications across human civilization. Tomorrow, this crystal would be placed in a time capsule as part of the bicentennial celebration, preserving the protocol's history for future generations. But tonight, in this quiet moment, Dr. Harrington-Chen wanted to connect personally with the legacy she carried. 200 years, she murmured to the sculpture. From one hospital room to the moons of Jupiter. From one nurse and one patient to a fundamental principle of healing throughout human civilization. As she stood in contemplation, her communication device chimed softly. Dr. Harrington-Chen, came the voice of her assistant, the transport from Mars has arrived with the delegation for tomorrow's ceremony. And there's a priority medical case, a mining engineer with severe trauma from an accident in the outer habitats. Minimal neural activity, but stable life signs. Prepare the trauma unit, she replied, already moving toward the exit. And implement the protocol immediately. Full sensory engagement, family connection if possible, continuous presence rotation among the staff. Yes, doctor. The technology team is suggesting consciousness mapping as the primary intervention. Dr. Harrington-Chen paused at the garden entrance. The technology is essential, but it's not sufficient. Assign our most experienced protocol practitioners to the case. Someone needs to be with this patient at all times, connecting, engaging, reminding them that they are not alone in the darkness. As she hurried through the colony's corridors toward the medical center, Dr. Harrington-Chen thought about how some things remained constant across centuries and solar systems. The technology had advanced beyond anything her ancestors could have imagined, but the human need for connection in times of crisis, the power of presence in the face of trauma, the dignity inherent in every person regardless of condition, these truths transcended time and space. In the trauma unit of the Ganymede Colony Medical Center, equipped with the most advanced healing technologies in human history, Dr. Harrington-Chen would sit beside the bed of an injured engineer and speak to them when the instruments showed little hope of response. She would connect across the void of unconsciousness, reach into darkness with the expectation of being heard, and believe in return when evidence suggested surrender. And in doing so, she would honor the legacy that had begun 2 centuries earlier, when doctors laughed at a new nurse, until a wounded SEAL commander saluted her. For in that legacy lay a truth as vast as the solar system humans now inhabited, that healing is not just a medical outcome but a human connection, that recovery is not just a physical process but a shared expedition, and that sometimes, the most powerful medicine is not found in technology or pharmaceuticals, but in the unwavering belief that every patient, no matter how wounded, deserves to be seen, heard, and called back to life. It was a story of hope in the face of impossible odds, of dignity preserved through simple respect, and of lives transformed by the courage to stand, or sit, beside someone when everyone else had walked away. And as humanity continued its journey among the stars, that story would continue to unfold, one patient, one caregiver, one moment of genuine connection at a time. The end.